Hello everybody, I'm GivesaPlanet, and today I'm going to be giving a presentation labeled I'm the Best, Lash, Draven, and TF2 Scout Analysis. Now, it's a little confusing, but I'll get into it, and this is going to be similar to the Struggles of Venator video, but more condensed and a little more abstract, yeah, hope you enjoy. Anyways, so what's the context? Well, Lash players, specifically for Deadlock, but also Draven players and Team Fortress 2 Scout players have what tends to be called a bias against them. And it usually stems from the, unfortunately, true stereotype that they tend to have very inflated egos and also don't really know how to take responsibility and die a lot, usually to things that were extremely preventable. Case in point, the Lash here blaming his teammates when he is 2-15 and then proceeds to run it down the middle lane with 0 allied assistance and a build that does not actually answer enemies' options. Now, obviously, this is extremely annoying and it's extremely detrimental because usually this means that you have either 1 of 6 in case of Deadlock, 1 of 5 in case of League, and 1 of whoever knows how many in case of Team Fortress 2 players on your team that are either not doing anything productive or actually completely hindering your team and usually losing you the win because if your Lash is dead on a 60-second timer, he doesn't really have an ultimate or abilities or items that he can use to stop an enemy pushing mid, pushing your base, an enemy taking mid, stuff like that. But despite how much they insist on that it's someone else's fault, it is usually theirs. But the question is, why does this happen? Because obviously every ranking in Deadlock and every character has either bad players or players who struggle to actually take responsibility. It could be a support player, it could be a hyper carry like 7, it could be a Lash player, it could be an Abrams. But the thing is that the Lash players specifically are a lot more prone to this. And the question is, why? Well, I have made a series of 4 points that explain kind of what causes this phenomenon, what makes it so that Lash players specifically have this elevated ego about them that usually shuns responsibility and, well, rational thinking and makes them think that not only are they exempt from a lot of the mistakes that they make, but also that they are much more skilled at the game than they actually are. So, here are the 4 points. Number 1, the character's personality and a process called assimilation, which I will get into. Number 2, the kits, or how the characters are designed. Number 3, the roles that these characters fill inside of the game. And number 4, the gameplay experience when you're playing as these characters. Now, a very big disclaimer here. I am not a psychologist and I am not a professional. I am a person on the internet who makes videos for fun. A lot of this video is going to be talking about stereotypes and be based on stereotypes and rough knowledge I have about this topic. I'm not an end-all be-all authority, and even then you should usually be getting your information from multiple sources if you can. And also, most of what I'm saying here is just something that I've observed, as I put on the very final slide. This is why Lash players are exempt from all faults. Usually they do make a lot of mistakes, but this is just kind of an interesting insight into why are they so much more prone than other characters, and why are they the standout examples. But with all of that said, and the warning given, let's get into this. So the first one is, who is the character and what are their vibes? Well, the first thing you'll notice as soon as you play and you get to know a little bit about each of these 3 characters here, Lash from Deadlock, Draven from League of Legends, and then the Scout from Team Fortress 2, is that all 3 of these characters have pretty big egos and are very, pride-driven. Lash is a boxer, is a very skilled boxer, who puts a lot of pride in, well, himself, and as the Deadlock description in game for him says that Jacob Lash is an asshole, which is pretty fair. He's very self-centered. He's very him-focused. He wholeheartedly believes he's better than most of the cast, to the point where I think he's one of the only characters that actually has like offensive nicknames for every single or almost every enemy that he runs into, and almost every part of his character is flair. The way he talks to the enemies and to himself and to his allies, his moves, I'm gonna get into that in the kit part, but a lot of his moves are very fluid and they're very like dramatic and with a lot of flair, with a lot of flashy visual sound effects and everything. And it's very, very egotistical. We get to Draven, who is kind of very, very similar. Draven is, at least from what I can tell, a gladiator, champion turned celebrity, and his entire thing is flair. His spinning axes and more or less stacking a style bonus from catching the axes, which is for those of you that don't really know, basically Draven's special mechanic is that when he attacks, because in League, top-down MOBA, you click to attack and your character attacks and everything like that. That's pretty much it. For Draven specifically, he has this unique gimmick where as long as his Q ability is activated, when he hits an enemy, it sends the axe flying back towards a designated spot on the map. And if you catch it, you reset the ability and you gain a stack of his passive, but only if you catch it, which means that he's a very, like, inherently, by the way he plays, he's a very flair-oriented character, because you're not just standing there attacking enemies, you have to be attacking enemies and catching axes and then juggling the two, literally and in a game sense. As for Scout TF2, he's not quite as showboaty as the other ones, but he does really think very highly of himself, and you'll notice this in a lot of his voice lines. And considering that the short film expiration date is quite literally about him trying to secure a date, he thinks very highly of himself, even if he may not fit the part. And a lot of his voice lines, the way he moves, the way he talks, and a lot of his weapons are very much like be as fast as possible with minimal care for survivability, and just being a very annoying and hard to hit character. And as you can see here, all of these three, or at least these three characters, kind of centralize on one theme, which is pride and a drive for flair, and not just flair, but also a certain level of perfection. You see this in all three of them, most notably in Lash and in Draven, and it makes it so that they're very, very, very much characters who want and who strive to be the best in their field possible, even like inside of the game, like with their gameplay mechanics, and also outside of the game in who they are as a character and everything like that. And obviously that bleeds a little bit over into the players, which is a process called assimilation. So assimilation, there's probably a more correct name for this, but at least from what I've noticed, is the process of someone, or at least usually a content creator, but it could also just be a general player who is drawn to a character, starts playing as the character, and then inherits certain properties and mannerisms of the character. Now, in this notable example, we have Alois, who is a League of Legends top lane streamer. He's pretty skilled. He's very fundamentals focused. So fundamentals is kind of just like macro gameplay. If you play Deadlock, it's very much like manipulating the economy, where your minions are, the timers, like mathematical equations to know how much XP you need, how much gold you need to gain a power boost, and all of that, which is usually a lot of very essential components in top lane, because certain matchups can be very unfavorable just by picking one character or another. So having fundamentals to rely on means that you can usually flip these games. Anyways, usually he plays Riven, who is a kind of just bruiser character. She runs in, she bashes everyone. She's a very mechanically complex character, but she's in a very at least she's complex in terms of execution, but not in terms of actual like difficulty. Her moves is fairly linear and everything like that. As of fairly recently, though, which was like a year or two ago, Alois picked up Dr. Mundo, who is a very interesting lead character. Compared to Riven, Dr. Mundo is an oddball. He is a very he is kind of like Lady Geist if she was mixed with Abrams for everyone who plays Deadlock. His entire gimmick is that his abilities cost health instead of mana, which I hope you know what mana is if you're watching this. If you don't, go watch any League video. So yeah, his abilities usually cost him health or directly damage him. For example, his Q costs him health with the throw. He gets refunded if he hits or kills a target, I'm not sure which. And then his W costs him health to activate, much like, actually, I know, he's Victor, basically. Dr. Mundo is very similar to Victor from Deadlock. Not one-to-one, debatably one-to-one, but they have very similar things of where they have an AoE that damages them and nearby enemies, a lot of passive healing, an ultimate that makes them, in Dr. Mundo's case, gives him massive stat boost, and then for Victor gives him a free resurrect. And overall, he's a character that scales very well because of how general mechanics in League work, and because of how Dr. Mundo works in terms of his passive and his kid, especially because of the fact that his ultimate is not affected by ability cooldown, which is one of the few ultimates in the game that has its effect, or ability cooldown reduction. It makes it so that he's very much a character that wants to play for much later in the game. Now, as you can see here, Dr. Mundo is very different from Riven, and so what's interesting to see is that Alois, after he starts playing Mundo, there's actually a fairly noticeable shift, specifically when he is playing Mundo. Case in point, the extremely dramatic Dr. Mundo cosplay here, which is for a different Mundo skin. But even when you're watching him play Dr. Mundo, you can see that his mindset and also the way he interacts with chat and the way he's talking, his occasional crash outs and stuff like that, it's very much more akin to Dr. Mundo than it is to Riven. It's a lot more dramatic, it's a lot more like monotone or singular syllable, and he has a shorter temper usually when he's playing Mundo, but it's a shorter temper but a faster recovery, so it's a lot of very small spikes of anger, rather than just like stewing and then boiling over towards the end of the game. It's very much it's very erratic. And what's interesting is that he was not like this before. This is specifically while he plays Mundo, and so what happens here is that a lot of Dr. Mundo's characteristics as a character and also as a playstyle, because Dr. Mundo, when you play him, is he's pretty much just walk in a straight line at the enemy, with some exception, but it's mostly walk in a straight line at the enemy and then beat them to death. And so you can see a lot of that kind of mindset and mentality actually shifts over to Alois, or the streamer in this case, and it kind of gets incorporated into how he talks and how he's playing and how he's actually interacting with the chat. And you can actually see this with a number of other people. For example, Flats from Overwatch, he's obviously this is a little bit stereotyping, but he's very much like the character Reinhardt. He's large, boisterous, very friendly, very not happy, but he's very joyful, willing to help his team, always strives to do the best as possible and everything. And if you go and look at Reinhardt as a character and also as a playstyle, it's very, very similar. Reinhardt is a very boisterous character. He's always caring for his teammates. He's always making sure they're safe, usually with his abilities and his shield. And so you can see that Flats carries, especially when he's playing as Reinhardt, a lot of that is transferred over to his personality. Now, admittedly, I should have added this, but there is, I suppose, a subset of assimilation, which is the fact that people are drawn to characters that think and act like them. For example, if you have a more introverted, quiet person who goes and plays Deadlock, it's obviously this is stereotyping, which is not great to do, but it's more likely they're going to play someone like Paige or Viscus or Vindicta, rather than go and play Abrams or Billy or Infernus. because the way those characters act and their playstyles and everything are a lot more attuned to their personality. And so what does this mean is, well, what that means is that when you have Lash players and they start playing Lash, and especially you start playing Lash for an extended amount of time, two things happen. One, they start adopting a lot of the characteristics and mannerisms, that's the word, mannerisms of Lash himself, which is the overabundant ego, the, refutation of the effort and quality of his teammates, the overconfidence in your skill and everything like that. And also, what happens is that usually the people who are going to play Lash are people who are also naturally more inclined to that. They're the people who boast a lot, who are very dramatic, who usually have a tendency or find a lot of value in material gain and being very the center of attention, and usually that's the kind of thing. So that's part of the equation, and it sets it up. So this is usually, you'll see this at like the start of the game or a little bit into lane, but that doesn't explain the rest of the game, especially not end game. So for that, we have to go into the kits and the designs, and usually, and specifically for these characters, all three of them have very much hit and run designs where you get into the fight, you deal a lot of damage, and then you bail, or you pray that you kill the enemy before you die. So in the case of Lash, usually he'll use his grapple to go above a target. Then he'll lead into his Death Slam, which pretty much guarantees that he'll be able to land his ground strike onto a target, and then usually he'll follow it up with Flog and then punching or shooting them. And so what you have here is that usually by using grapple to get in instead of just walking or shooting at the enemy, it makes it really hard for enemies to actually hit him because of the aerial mobility that it gives. Also, if you don't really understand what all the kits do, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to look it up afterwards. I don't really have the time to fully explain every single move in detail, but basically, grapple gives him the aerial mobility and the speed needed to actually get into the fight. Then Death Slam pretty much guarantees that enemies can't escape, or in the case where he's dealing with a lot of people that are spread out, it clumps them all together and puts them in a central location so that he doesn't have to so that he can get maximum value out of his Ground Strike. Ground Strike is an ability that's stronger from higher up you are, which yet again ties into the idea that he's evasive. He's not just, it's not something like Abrams charge where you're most likely going to be shooting Abrams before, during, and after the charge. Usually when a Lash uses a ground strike, you're not able to hit him, and it's pretty difficult to be able to actually escape him. And then Flog is a survivability tool, and also it applies some debuffs to the enemy, I believe, which is usually enough to finish them off if they haven't already died to Death Slam, Ground Strike, and allied damage. I'm going to get back to Draven. Scout TF2 is simpler, but it's still a very much hit and run design because that's his entire thing as a character. Usually he'll use his pistol as opening damage at medium range, usually to chip away at enemies or to grab their attention, which it depends. But usually he can open up with his pistol. Then usually he'll use his scattergun, which is one of the strongest shotguns it's the strongest shotgun in the game, and also one of the strongest close quarters weapons in the game. And then after that, once he's done his damage, he usually bails out with his fairly increased movement speed and his double jump, which is, he's the only character in the game to have one, and specifically in Team Fortress 2, because of the way the maps are created, a lot of them have elevated ledges or drop downs or stuff like that for most characters, they either have to go around to a staircase or they have to use some other form of mobility. For example, a soldier has a rocket jump to actually get up there. Meanwhile, the scout just has an innate double jump, so he can use that as free mobility to save a lot of time and also weave around the map and get to flank routes or to positions before the enemy, or in a route that they're not expecting, to be able to actually secure a kill and then get out, because he doesn't want to be in the fray. He's very fragile, and pretty much all of his weapons are best in close range. He has to be pretty much up close and personal with a target. So that's what his mobility and it's his mobility, his leaner hitbox, and his double jump offer him. Draven. Now, admittedly, Draven is not technically a hit-and-run character. That would be someone more like a Kali, the ninja who has a lot of dashes and invisibility, and she has multiple dashes and invisibility and a very high damage burst. However, Draven does technically fit the description because he does not want to stay mobile. Yet again, because of his spinning axes gimmick, usually it's a very, very bad idea for him to just be standing still when he's fighting, because it leaves him extremely exposed to spells, to incoming damage, to minion damage, and other things like this, which, considering none of his moves give him any survivability at all, that's not great. So he really wants to stay on the move, and usually what he'll do is he'll want to go in on a target, secure the kill, and then get out. So usually he'll use his E to hinder them for a moment. He'll use his W to give himself a boost of attack speed and movement speed so he can rush in on them. He'll use his Q here to give himself the bonus damage and the spinning axe effect, which gives him stacks of his passive and makes him deal more damage. And then usually, if he isn't able to actually kill the target, he can use his ultimate, which is a global, it sends out 2 axes across the entire map, and it deals a ton of damage. And so it's usually used as an execute if the target manages to get away. And so even if you do watch a more skilled Draven actually playing, what you'll notice is that even in the moments where he's just fighting, compared to someone else, a Draven character has to manage 2 things. They have to manage, 1, the enemy and actually fighting the enemy like any other character, but 2, they also have to manage their spinning axes, because as a Draven character, as a Draven player, you absolutely have to have the axes spinning. It's where most of your damage and where most of your passive, which gives you a very big influx of gold if you manage to build the stacks, comes from. So he's very much Draven very much has to juggle playing between hitting the enemy, catching the axes, and also staying at a range where he can, if needed, go in, secure kill, and then get out, but does not stick around any longer than he has to. Now, the third point that usually ties into why they might into this explanation of these characters is their role in the team, and it's usually, in this case, the fact that most of them are flankers or initiators. Lash is initiator. Draven is technically an initiator, I suppose. He probably fits the role of 7, like a carry that has to farm for a while, but you can slot him in pretty much anywhere. And then Scout TF2 is very much both a flanker and an initiator. So in the case of this example here, you can see 7 over here, who's just a standard carry, which, for those of you who don't know, is just basically a lot of damage, minimal mobility, minimal defense tools. Here he's facing an Abrams, and if this 7 wants to get through and actually hit this page over here, he can't really do much. He really has to go through the Abrams. That he can't go around it. If he tries to, he's probably going to get killed by the Abrams, so he has to dedicate most of his resources to actually killing, or at least getting the Abrams to leave before he can go on and kill the page. Lash, however, as you can see, he just ignores the Abrams because of his aerial mobility and the fact that grapple sends him far up into the air, and also his ground strike benefits from him being in the air. It makes it so that he can dodge a lot of what would be a team's front line to directly go and hit the enemy team's backline. And usually the enemy backline is characters that don't really have very good escape tools and very much survivability. They're characters that are meant to be assisting their allies. They don't have much self-preservation skills. And so because of this, usually a character like Lash is going to be the one who starts the fight, who goes in either from an unseen angle or with his ultimate to guarantee a kill, and then from there he's able to, if not guarantee a kill, he can at least get the page out of the way and remove her from the fight, which means that the Abrams is now significantly weaker, and him plus 7 can kill the Abrams, or just the 7 can kill the Abrams. And what this leads to is that these characters, they're really important in a team. For example, like a scout. If you have a scout in higher level Team Fortress 2 matches, if you have a scout, usually a scout actually does want to, like, will willingly die if they can guarantee that they can kill the enemy medic, because the enemy medic is the single strongest character on the team, because he's the sole source, or the most reliable source of healing for everyone on his team, and he has Uber Charge, which allows him to get past sentries, shut down, like force enemies off of a point, force enemy, or like blitz through a choke point when normally his team would just get destroyed, and so on. And usually this means that these characters have to make either the first move or the second move. It's either just the first move in a fight or the first commitment in a fight. And so what that means is that you can't really second guess if you're playing as Lash. You can't really just like jump in, like think about it for a couple seconds, hover midair, and then be like, yeah, nah, I'm out, and then just leave. If you're going in on this page here, you really have to go in on this page, and you're basically, it's a race against time of you have the resources to kill the page before you die. Yet again, with the scout is basically gambling that they can go in, get the kill on the higher priority enemy target, and then before they die, and usually that's a net win for their team. Same thing with Draven. Draven wants to go in, usually get a kill, and then get out before the rest of the enemy team collapses on him and then kills him, which makes him lose a very large, it's half of his passive stacks, which is massive hindrance to his gold economy. And so what this means is that usually, yet again, the people who you'll have playing Lash and Scout and Draven are people who will innately just commit to things like this. They are going to just be like, I see an enemy support that's open and ready to die, I'm going to run at them. I'm going to go and I'm going to kill them, because the character and the role doesn't allow for the chance. It doesn't allow for the opportunity for you to second guess yourself. Now, the fourth part of this, which is a little more personal preference, I suppose, which is the vibes of their gameplay. And I'm going to be honest, once you start playing these characters, you kind of understand where they're coming from, because much like the scene here, which if you know it, you kind of get what's going on here. If you don't, no spoilers for you. But it's just, these characters have usually because of how their kits are designed and because they're very mobile characters, they're very fluid characters. So they move fast. They're very agile, they're usually very slippery, hard for enemies to hit, and they also deal a lot of damage, and usually in very large bursts, and it just makes for an extremely satisfying and, frankly, extremely hard to replicate gameplay feeling that almost no other character has. And it's really hard to find anywhere else, and it's also extremely satisfying because the rush of adrenaline you have when you're playing Lash, when you grapple onto an enemy and you dive bomb them, knowing that you're either going to instantly obliterate them or deal almost half of their maximum health in one ground strike, and then they are just going to keel over, and there's nothing the enemy team can do to stop you. It's just, you feel all powerful. There's nothing that can stop you. There's nothing they can do, and you're untouchable. You're just flying around, and you're basically running the lobby. And that kind of leads to the issue where when you have this mindset of being all powerful, and being completely untouchable, you get a little bit of pride, you get a little bit of a boosted ego from that. You get a rush, and people like their rushes, and the brain likes its dopamine. The brain wants to keep its dopamine, so it wants to keep the rush going, which is why usually you see Lash players who going several times in a fight, even when they don't have the resources to kill the last remaining members of the team. And it's because the brain wants that rush. It wants more and more and more of that feeling of being invincible, basically, and just being an all-powerful god in the lobby. And Yeah, that's usually what ends up getting them killed. So yeah, in conclusion, is it entirely a Lash player's fault for the way they play? No, not entirely. There's a lot of factors between how the character's personality is the process of assimilation where the person playing will adopt some of the characteristics and parts of the personality of the character itself. There's the kits and the roles of the character that make it so that they're very slippery and very committal based. So the person has to have a certain level of innate confidence and innate strength, and also ego to be able to commit and actually secure a kill and go for a play and do their playmaking, and then also the actual vibes of the gameplay of the character itself causes a very large and very satisfying dopamine rush that makes it so that usually you want more of the rush, and so you go back in or you go for an even more ambitious play every single time because you're on cloud 9 and there's nothing that can stop you. But does this mean that they are exempt from all responsibility? No. You would still need to check your ego. Like, be responsible. If you make a play that went wrong, don't blame your teammates. Just accept, and even like something that I've learned from playing games and everything is that if you explain something to someone, as long as you haven't fucked up absolutely terribly, they understand it. If you're playing Lash and you're doing pretty well through the game and you're on a hot streak, you're doing great, and you make one play and you end up dying and everything, instead of just instantly grilling your teammates because your dopamine has crashed and you're no longer running the lobby, just apologize and say, I thought I could get them. I was being a little over ambitious. Like, as long as you haven't done that too many times, people are gonna understand it. They know what Lash's character is like. They know what the people playing him are like, and they're gonna be like, oh, okay, it's fine. Just be careful next time, and just like take the responsibility, because most of the time people are gonna be okay with it and they're gonna let it slide. But yeah, anyways, yeah, that was today's video. Thank you very much for watching this presentation. It's not quite as directly relevant as the previous one, and maybe I've got some sections wrong, so please let me know in the comments down below. But I think it is just an interesting phenomenon because I've been watching Lash players and stuff like that throughout the past couple of months, or years actually at this point. I've always kind of wondered what makes them tick like that. Why do they think like that? And there's a lot that goes into it actually, and it's not just the players' egos. There's actually a lot of science that goes behind it, and that explains why they might be playing like this. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and I will catch you next time.